The corridors of Westbrook Genetics had a certain smell, part disinfectant, part ozone, and part the faint tang of ambition. People said the place never slept, and that was true. It was 2 a.m, yet behind every glass-paneled door, men and women in pristine lab coats still hovered over microscopes, peered into centrifuge tubes, and tapped furiously at keyboards. The building was alive with humming machines, blinking monitors, and the constant shuffle of papers. Inside Laboratory 7, the air was heavier than anywhere else. Not because of chemicals, it was the weight of frustration that hung there. Around the central workstation, 5 scientists stood staring at a large display showing a twisting, shimmering strand of DNA rendered in neon blue and gold. The sequence rotated slowly on the screen, a visual representation of a project that had consumed them for months and drained millions in research funds. Dar. Marcus Hill, the project lead, leaned forward with both hands gripping the edge of the table, his jaw tight. "It's not holding," he muttered. His voice was low, but it carried an edge of desperation. "We're missing something obvious. I can feel it." Beside him, a young postdoc named Rachel flipped through her notes, her messy bun threatening to collapse under the weight of her pen tucked into it. "The stabilization phase always collapses at the tertiary folding stage," she said, not bothering to hide her irritation. "We've run it at every reasonable temperature, adjusted the catalysts, and even changed the folding sequence order. The protein just won't hold its structure." Another team member, Evan, shook his head. "We're modeling the stabilization at 37 degrees Celsius because that's human body temperature. The therapy's supposed to work in vivo. Dropping the temp lower isn't realistic, it has to function in a living patient." "But what if?" Rachel began, before cutting herself off with a sigh. They'd had this conversation before. Every potential solution circled back to the same wall. In the far corner of the lab, unseen and unacknowledged, Marlene Jacobs dipped her mop into a bucket and squeezed the water out with steady, mechanical motions. Her navy blue janitorial uniform was spotless, her hair tucked beneath a headscarf, and her gloves a faded yellow from years of use. She moved silently, the squeak of the mop the only hint she was there. The scientists rarely spoke to her unless they needed her to move something. She didn't mind, she'd been invisible in rooms like this for most of her life. But Marlene's ears were not idle. Every night, while she cleaned floors and wiped down counters, she listened. She listened to the rhythm of scientific debate, the rise and fall of voices arguing about gene sequences, protein misfolding, mutagenic stability, and binding sites. She didn't understand every single technical term anymore. It had been years since she sat in a university classroom, but she understood enough. Enough to know that tonight, Dr. Hill's tone was more desperate than usual. Marlene had once been where they stood now, well, almost. 2 decades earlier, she had been a top student in biochemistry at the state university. She'd had plans, big plans, to work in research, maybe even lead her own lab someday. But life has a way of rearranging dreams. Her mother had fallen ill with a rare autoimmune disease, the kind that drained both bodies and bank accounts. The medical bills piled up faster than she could work. Marlene had tried to juggle full-time studies with part-time jobs, but when her mother's condition worsened, she dropped out to care for her. One semester off turned into a permanent withdrawal. After her mother passed, Marlene found herself with no degree, a gap in her work history, and rent to pay. She took whatever work she could get. Factory jobs, housekeeping, night shifts in office buildings. Cleaning laboratories like this was just the latest in a long line. But she never stopped reading. At the library, she'd skim through science journals, teaching herself about the breakthroughs she might have been a part of. She understood just enough to know that the work being done in Laboratory 7 was groundbreaking, if they could figure it out. She pushed the mop slowly across the tiles, her head bent as though she were lost in the rhythm of her work. But in truth, she was piecing together the fragments of conversation she'd overheard over the past few weeks. She knew about Sequence C, the strand of engineered DNA the team was trying to stabilize. She'd heard about the adenine substitution at position 4, and the folding problem that kept derailing them. Tonight, something about the way Rachel and Evan spoke clicked in her mind. She paused mid-swipe, the mop handle still in her hands. No, could it really be that simple? She replayed the last few minutes of their discussion in her head, cross-referencing it with a dusty mental file from her university days. Protein folding depended on environment. Yes, they'd modeled it at human body temperature, but mutations, especially substitutions, could alter hydrogen bonding in ways that made normal conditions less than optimal. If the mutation at position 4 was changing the stability of the tertiary structure, lowering the temperature might help the fold lock in place. But not just a little lower. Lower than they'd dared to test. Marlene's heart beat faster. She shouldn't say anything. It wasn't her place. She was just the cleaning lady, and people didn't like being corrected by the cleaning lady, especially not people with doctorates. But the thought of walking away and letting them waste another month gnawed at her. She leaned the mop against the wall. "Excuse me," she said quietly. No one heard her. She took a step forward, cleared her throat louder. "Excuse me, Dr. Hill." The room went still. Every head turned toward her, expressions ranging from mild annoyance to confusion. Dr. Hill raised an eyebrow. "Yes. Marlene, isn't it? Do you need something?" She hesitated, then squared her shoulders. "I think you're folding the protein in sequence C at the wrong temperature." A flicker of amusement crossed Evan's face. Rachel frowned. "How do you know about sequence C?" Marlene didn't flinch. "I've been listening. You said the adenine swap was throwing off the tertiary structure. I think the mutation changes the hydrogen bonding enough that it needs a cooler environment to stabilize, cooler than 35 degrees. Dr. Hill stared at her. "We tested lower temperatures already." "Not low enough," she said simply. "Try 33 degrees. A ripple of incredulous laughter passed between the scientists. Evan muttered something under his breath about janitors and thermodynamics. But Rachel hesitated. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. "It's easy to simulate," she murmured. Dr. Hill didn't stop her. He crossed his arms, watching as Rachel input the new parameters. The computer hummed, the simulated environment adjusting. 30 seconds later, the screen flashed green. The protein folded perfectly, and held. No one spoke. Rachel's mouth fell open. It worked. Dr. Hill's gaze shifted back to Marlene, his expression unreadable. "How did you know that?" Marlene reached for her mop. "Sometimes it's easier to see the pattern when you're not staring at the screen all day." She began mopping again as though nothing had happened. But in that instant, the room's atmosphere shifted. They no longer saw her as just the cleaning lady. And Dr. Hill, for the first time that night, was not thinking about sequence C, he was thinking about the woman with the mop and how she had just solved the problem that had stumped his entire team.